Welcome, everyone, to this explainer. Right now, you are doing something so automatic, you probably aren't even giving it a second thought. You're understanding the words I'm saying, and you can easily read the text in front of you. But behind the scenes, well, there is an absolutely astonishing, highly dynamic construction site actively working inside your head that makes reading possible. Today, we're going to literally look under the hood at the exact mechanics of how our brains learn to read. Okay, let's dive into this with a quote from French cognitive neuroscientist Professor Stanislas Dehaene that I just love. He says, "You can listen to the dead with your eyes." Seriously, just think about that for a second. Reading isn't just some mundane chore we're forced to learn in elementary school. It's a profound human miracle. Because you learn to read, you can look at a piece of paper or a screen and instantly absorb the private thoughts of someone who lived thousands of years ago. It is quite literally the ultimate form of telepathy, and as we'll see, it fundamentally alters the human brain. Here is the blueprint for our tour today. 1. Not born to read. 2. Building the brain's letterbox. 3. Unlearning evolutionary symmetry. 4. Navigating the reading pathways. 5. Phonics over global shape. And 6. Empowering the reading brain. Let's jump right in. To truly appreciate this blueprint, we have to start with Section 1. Not born to read. Because unlike spoken language, reading is an evolutionary hack. We just aren't wired for it. Think about how a child learns to talk. When a baby is born, their spoken language systems for sound and meaning are already there. They're just waiting to be activated. It's an innate, deeply natural human ability. But written language, that's a completely different story. There is absolutely no biological reading center in the brain at birth. None. Written language is a human invention, a technology we constructed. So to actually learn to read, our visual system has to be meticulously, physically retrained to understand text. So if we aren't born with a reading center, how on earth do we read? Well, that brings us to Section 2, building the brain's letterbox. This is where the brain literally starts making physical space for reading. The brain pulls this off through a fascinating process called neuronal recycling. Basically, the brain acts like a highly efficient construction crew. It takes an older, generic visual area of the brain, one that originally evolved just to recognize everyday objects and faces, and actively recycles it to make room for reading letters. And what is absolutely wild about this is that as the brain makes room for text in the left hemisphere, it actually pushes some of our facial recognition capabilities over to the right hemisphere. Reading quite literally reorganizes the real estate inside your head. And this brilliantly illustrates what Professor Dehaene calls the brain's letterbox. Scientifically, it's known as the visual word form area. This is a specialized, custom-built interface created in your left hemisphere specifically to store your knowledge of letters. When a kid learns to read, they are effectively building this letterbox from the ground up. It becomes the absolutely crucial bridge connecting our visual system to those spoken language systems we were born with. Now, building this new structure isn't exactly a walk in the park. We really need to address one of the most misunderstood stages of childhood reading development in Section 3, unlearning evolutionary symmetry. Imagine a snake out in the wild. Evolution gave us an amazing spatial recognition system that tells us an object is the exact same thing regardless of its orientation. A snake is a snake, whether it's hanging from a branch, coiled on the ground, or facing left or right. Your brain naturally says, hey, these are all the same. But the newly forming letterbox, it demands the exact opposite. Suddenly, a stick and a bubble mean something entirely different depending on which way it faces. Is it a B, a D, a P, or a Q? There is an intense, literal battle going on in the brain between millions of years of evolutionary spatial recognition and this brand new reading system. This is so important for parents and teachers to hear. When a child flips letters like B and D or does that cute mirror writing, it is not an immediate sign of dyslexia, and it is definitely not a failure. It is simply a trace of an old evolutionary survival system trying to learn a completely new trick. It's a completely universal, natural hurdle where the brain is actively having to unlearn symmetry. Once that letterbox is solidly built, the confusion just naturally fades away. All right, let's move along to Section 4, navigating the reading pathways. Once the letterbox is up and running and symmetry is unlearned, the brain builds some incredibly specific internal roads. Think of reading as traveling down a newly paved highway. Step 1 is vision. Visual information enters the brain's letterbox, where we identify the specific letters. Let's say we see the letters B, A, T. Step 2 is sound. We travel up what's called the phonological route. We translate those letters into sounds. B says ba, A says T says ta.
We blend it together to hear bat. Finally, step 3 is meaning. We travel down the lexical route. Your brain basically checks its internal dictionary. Did you mean the animal bat, a baseball bat, or swatting a bug away? Context steps in to give us the final meaning. And this whole sequence, it happens in a fraction of a second.
Now, what's really interesting to see here is how Nancy Young's data breaks down the speed at which different brains travel these newly built pathways. You see, everyone has to build the exact same letterbox and phonological route. Our brains don't learn completely different ways to read. We're all on the exact same brain pathway, but we are traveling in very different vehicles. For about 5 to 10% of the population, learning to read seems completely effortless. They are flying in planes. For 75 to 80% of us, we need direct instruction. We're driving in cars, getting there steadily. And for 10 to 15% of folks, they are on bikes that are working incredibly hard, needing intense instruction and a ton of repetition to travel that same road. But the route itself, it's identical for all of us. Understanding that universal pathway leads us perfectly into Section 5, Phonics over Global Shape. We really need to bust a massive educational myth about how we actually process words on a page. For decades, people honestly believed that as we become fluent, fast readers, we stop looking at individual letters and just recognize the global shape or the whole outline of a word. But modern brain imaging proves this is a total illusion. When you look at a word right now, your brain is still processing every single individual letter. The difference is that as an adult, you do it in 100% parallel. You are recognizing all the letters simultaneously, which just makes it feel like you're reading the whole word in one giant gulp. Because the brain actually processes letters individually, the idea of whole word reading is just a myth. When kids start out, reading begins as a very slow, serial process, literally one letter at a time. That's exactly why teaching phonics, explicitly connecting letters to sounds, is scientifically proven to be the absolute fastest pathway to reading mastery. It directly builds that essential phonological route we talked about. And here's a fun fact. Research also shows that teaching cursive writing actively helps kids break that evolutionary symmetry problem by adding a physical motor circuit to the learning process. How cool is that?
Now, all of this brain imaging and neuroscience isn't just to sound smart at dinner parties. Let's move to our final stop, Section 6, Empowering the Reading Brain, to see what happens when we bring this science directly into the classroom.
So, the crucial point is this. Teaching kids about their own brain architecture profoundly changes their entire educational experience. When a child learns that reading isn't some magical, innate talent they were just born without, but rather a physical structure their brain literally has to construct, it completely demystifies the learning process for them. It massively lowers their frustration and anxiety when they stumble on a word. It proves to them that the brain is a muscle that physically changes with their effort. It totally validates the need for explicit instruction and removes that heavy burden of shame. I want to leave you all with a final thought today. When a child struggles to read, they so often write this quiet, painful story in their head that they just aren't smart. But what if we showed them the blueprints? What if the story they tell themselves isn't "I'm not smart," but instead, "my brain is just still building its pathways"? Imagine the kind of resilience and confidence that perspective would unlock in a kid. We have the science. Now it's up to us to share this empowering reality with every student, educator, and parent we know. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, keep building those pathways.